So, in order to understand all the different components to our belief system today that emerged, the question is about who were the other in Rome. And within that question, you don't just have the emergence of Christianity, they were a major other. You also have the issue of the people within Europe. And so, under Rome has always really operated with a bit of a client state mentality. Do you know what I mean? It's like imposing a franchising economic system, so Roman towns all look the same. Do you know what I mean? In the same way as, I don't know, in the same way as you've got a Greggs and a Costa and a Caffè Nero on every high street and a Boots Rome was a bit like that. You could tell where things were going to be in Rome. Do you know what I mean? A Roman town in England would be pretty much like a Roman town. You knew exactly what components would be there. But the question of the other is really important. So the Roman military is very much a place where the other can come up from these occupied peoples and become what they believe they're part of Rome. And the Roman army is incredibly diverse. It's incredibly diverse. And one of the really interesting things, so you haven't just got Christianity as a belief system emerging from the other. You've actually got the seeds of dynastic structures that emerge in Europe, emerging within Rome. So within the army, dynastic structures are emerging. Family structures, power structures are emerging within the Roman military, which are tied to the various countries in Europe. Alaric, who the sacking of Rome is attributed to, came up through the Roman military. So the existing countries who have been occupied by Rome for a very, very, very long time. In England, we were really late on. Britannia was like 400 years occupation, really at the back end of the Roman Empire. In actual fact, the elites within these, the indigenous elites in Europe have kind of militarized and developed kind of dynastic structures. And it's actually this that you see as the seeds of the barbarian kingdoms of Europe. I'm not going to give you a lecture on, which are which, but, understanding the emergence of, the Merovingian dynasties, understanding, how the Lombard people who formed the foundation of Italy came from. These are actually an elite that emerges within Rome, but they're the other. And the Roman elite cannot cope, really, with the fact that they've got poor and the other is now their future. And in actual fact, the last Roman emperor in the western half of Rome, he's really funny. It reminds me of the Targaryen dragons, you know what I mean? They start off big fiery dragons and end up the size of kittens and dogs. It was a little boy called Romulus Augustus. And largely the fall of the Roman Empire didn't happen. The West got poor, and the other within Rome, who were an essential part of their future, the Roman elite, couldn't deal with these people on an equal basis. And rather than address this division of the other that had actually kept Rome stable under Diocletian, the psychological wound that Rome could be sacked as a city by this other had to be addressed. And this is all that really happens. But by the time of the sacking of Rome, the economic balance of power has shifted massively east. Constantine very much consolidates Roman resources east. And in actual fact, the Romans leaving England is not a big dramatic story, although I am going to talk about it quite specifically in a minute. But within these other, is the emergence of the barbarian kingdoms, which formed the seeds of the kingdoms that we now understand as France, Germany, the countries of Europe. And through the emergence of Christianity as a belief system, it's not only about the fact that it allows people to move away from this kind of thinking about lots of different gods and thinking about one system, which is a really important development that's not just happening with Christianity. There's a bubbling kind of ferment of monotheism that's emerging. What Christianity provides to what's left in the western half of the Roman Empire is a belief system that eventually binds them. And it's the other, the elites that had formed within Rome, that form the barbarian nations. And each different country in Europe has a different kind of beginning that's linked to the end of the Roman Empire in some way, whether it be their story about Alaric, whether it be the story about Clovis and the Franks, and you know, these are all really interesting stories. And I would really watch that Paul Friedman lecture series and listen, go read about somebody who's a damn sight more interested and knowledgeable than me. But that's what's occurring here. The other have to emerge because they are the future of the western half of the Roman Empire. But the actual Roman Empire continues quite happily in the East, right, you know, doesn't end till like the 1400s. But we don't get taught about Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire at school. And when we do get taught about the Byzantine Empire, we're not entirely sure where they came from because we don't know that that's just Rome. And it's not like they called themselves the Byzantine Empire. We called them this. Western historians had to come up with a name for the Byzantine Empire, I think, to account for our abandonment issues. All that really happened was that the western half of the Roman Empire got unfashionable and poor, and new things had to emerge. And so this is rather not a story about, you know, this terrible one-off event that Rome as a city fell and an entire empire fell. Actually, the economic imbalance had been in evidence for a very long time. It had been formalised within Rome's structure. Then there had been a consolidation east. And people in the western half were left to kind of pick up, you know, to develop new things that we now sit, you know, these are the countries that we know. This is the history of our countries. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the East. And I'm not going to go over different countries, and I'm not going to talk about Alaric, and I'm not going to talk about the Franks. What I'm going to talk about is us, Britannia, what happened to us. Now, what's very, very clear is that what coincided with the end, the acknowledgement that the western half of the Roman Empire had failed, there was a dramatic material simplification. This led to a loss of infrastructure. This led to a loss of economic organisation. And it is literally like the lights went out in Europe, but they did not go out elsewhere. No, this is not. And we call this period the Dark Ages, because it was for us. And this is the start of our own history. The Dark Ages, there's nothing dark about the fucking Dark Ages. And that's because in the western half of the Roman Empire there was a dramatic rural simplification. We went from having highly developed, you know, infrastructure that was entirely dependent now on our links with the East. That no longer applied anymore. You know, and it's like the light went out and knowledge was lost. Huge amounts of knowledge. No, we like to talk about Christianity as waging a war on knowledge, and it does appear that way when we look at our own history back the way. But in actual fact, originally it was Christians who were preserving this knowledge all over Europe. But, you know, there was a massive, you know, western half of the Roman Empire had to accept a dramatic change in circumstances. We did not have the economic power in this half of what used to be the Roman Empire to even sustain our membership of this elite club that continues in the East quite happily. And we go backwards. Like, we lose knowledge. That's the only way you can describe it. It's a complete loss of knowledge. Without the infrastructure, without Rome holding everything together, this goes. And we kind of have to start again from scratch. So what I'm going to talk about in the next video is the relationship of the UK, who we are now, to the end of Rome. And that's what I'm going to look at. And it's quite interesting, is our relationship with Rome, I think, and it tells us a lot about our relationship with the bloody EU. Oh, you know, really. So I'm going to skip to the next video.